when we come to materiel, that's kit. This is where Russia really is in trouble. There are things that they've ramped up enormously, and we should talk about it in a minute, which is domestic production of drones, particularly Russian versions of the Iranian Shahed drone. But when you look to barrels, by that I mean heavy caliber barrels for tanks and artillery, they're finding it very, very difficult to keep up. And when you look, they've just about hit the 10,000 mark of main battle tanks, that have been lost since February 2022.
You do wonder if Trump will end up losing patience with Putin, if Putin is not prepared to compromise. And there may be an element of his demands at the moment that he's reiterating publicly just being brinkmanship. I mean, that is the nature of striking any deal. You set out your demands and then you compromise once you get around the table. But whether he can even get him around the table is an issue. And I know a lot has been made of Trump's previous comments that he could end the war within 24 hours. That clearly isn't going to happen. But then you also get the appointment of people like General Kellogg, as his special envoy for Ukraine and Russia, who has previously said, look, if Putin does not make concessions, we should ramp up military aid for Ukraine. So do you think actually Trump may end up in a more hawkish position when it comes to Ukraine and Russia than many people expect?
Well, he doesn't like Ukraine and he doesn't like the Ukrainian conflict. So I doubt if he's going to ramp up. He will try to avoid it. I suspect that Keith Kellogg may well be one of the first casualties of this administration because he'll be changeable about it. But what Trump will want to prove with Putin is that he can best him, that he's regarded Putin in the past as the only leader in the world almost who was up to him in skill. But Putin has been quite open about his contempt for Trump personally in the recent past. So I don't think this is a marriage made in heaven. But it does mean there will be an awful lot for the Europeans, including the British, to do in this, because it seems from what Kirillov Budanov was saying, a very important figure in the way the Ukrainian regime faces out to the world, and we'll name who he is again in a minute. But he is saying they are prepared to go on with the war. They're going to grit in, and they're going to use very different methods. By the way, in the information war and the trolling, Budanov is infinitely more successful than his opposite numbers on the Kremlin side. Lieutenant General is he, now Kirillov Budanov is in charge of psychological warfare, intelligence, propaganda. He plays with everybody. He is brilliant at massaging and manipulating the Western press, and he keeps them guessing. He makes sure, like any good propagandist, that 90% or there's a high percentage of fact, but what he is spinning, a lot of them can't make out. But it's very interesting in his latest public interview for publication and obviously for consumption, not least in Russia, but also in the West, that means Europe and the United States. Kirillov Budanov is betting on Russia getting into real trouble with its economy by the summer. And that looks like being a very interesting point for Putin to navigate. And it could break him, because at the moment, in the simple, crude terms of economy, which is about people, they're just about managing to replace the number of casualties they're recording per month, which globally is roughly, they're losing about 30,000 a month, which is an awful lot. And through recruitment, through veiled mass mobilization, bribery, leaving, a lot of incentives to join up in the Russian forces, that they seem to be managing just about. They're losing far too many. They're losing per square kilometer gained. They're losing colossal number of forces. And I've just looked at the the latest calculations. Okay, mostly it's based on figures from Kiev, from the London MOD, and from America. But up to 450,000 casualties have been recorded on the Ukraine front by the Russian forces. That is killed, quite a lowish proportion of that, about a third, I would suspect. But the rest are immobilized. They're so badly injured and damaged that they cannot be rehabilitated and returned to the front. That's a colossal number to be losing. And if they're going to lose at the same rate through the first half of 2025, I think it's going to be very difficult. Now that they are managing to replace, as I was saying, but looking at the figures again, mind you, we don't hear much about the Ukrainian losses because they have been managing brilliant operational security, in other words, secrecy about their losses. But when we come to materiel, that's kit, this is where Russia really is in trouble. There are things that they've ramped up enormously, and we should talk about it in a minute, which is domestic production of drones, particularly Russian versions of the Iranian Shahed drone. But when you look to barrels, by that I mean heavy caliber barrels for tanks and artillery, they're finding it very, very difficult to keep up. And when you look, they've just about hit the 10,000 mark of main battle tanks, of tanks that have been lost since February 2022.
Well, that's a really interesting point, and let's explore that. I mean, could this be the year where a lot of these things come to a head for Russia, not just in terms of supply of material, but also you look at the economy in the same way you can't talk about war without talking about politics, you can't talk about politics without talking about economics. And already you're seeing signs of the Russian government being aware of the need to reduce the long-term costs of the war. You've now got them saying they're going to deprive prisoners who volunteer to fight in Ukraine the one-time enlistment bonus. They're clearly worried about some of these escalating costs associated with the war. How sustainable are those costs, and could they come to a head in the next 12 months?
Well, in economic terms, it looks ridiculous in a way that the bank rate has gone up from 21%, possibly up to 23%, but being held for some months through 2024 at around 21%. But there are speculations that it will go to 23%. Inflation is just about heading towards double digits. It's 8.99%. That they're finding it very difficult to trade in foreign currency. And it looks as if the gas and oil, the hydrocarbon economy, is going to be essential. And they're beginning to squeeze it in a way. They are hugely reliant on the shadow fleets, the rather dodgily flagged tankers and freighters, which have a horrible habit of breaking up and causing trouble. And then we've had the shutdown of the trans-Ukrainian gas lines, which is going to affect immediately Slovakia and not so much Hungary, Slovakia and Austria. Let's get this right. And then Czechia, the Czech Republic. But watch who's making quite a big noise about it, and I'd like to have a little exchange with you about it, is Italy, of the major EU partners, that is really, really worried about it. And I'm really concerned about possibly Italy beginning to develop a double game towards the Kremlin. But it is looking bad, and this is where the crucial figure, and we hear from her from time to time, and there have been reports that she may even have offered her resignation back in the summer, and it's Elvira Nabiulina, the very astute, trusted by Putin, curiously, governor of the central bank. And she has warned and warned and warned about the difficulties of the economy. Now, look at it. Yes, if it was an economy like Spain or Italy, and the Russian economy is roughly somewhere between those two countries, as far as we can make, there would be real problems. There would be real problems of confidence. Not that there aren't, but it can be concealed, because this is a total command economy run by a dictatorship. So how much this can endure, how much it can cover up, and how much it can operate in complete contempt of its consumers, of its civilian population, which are beginning increasingly to have a miserable time with consumer prices going up, the cost of living. That is the big question. All this is up in the air. But in the end, it is the economy of the battlefield that's going to decide. And on that, we have to look very carefully at where Ukraine wins and where it is vulnerable. And it's in the same sphere. What is going on in the air is simply fascinating, because if you had gone to the think tanks of UK, France, Germany, and America, places like RUSI and the IISS in London, that very estimable, turning out very interesting material. If you'd gone to them, say, in 2020, 2021, they would say this much reformed Russian armed forces, that the Air Force would be totally dominant. This is the problem for Russia, where Ukraine has done terribly well with the help of sanctions, is that there is no total air dominance still over this battle line up to, and we're coming up in February to the third anniversary over 3 years. And this is incredible in a way, as indeed is the marine activity of Ukraine. That they're using robotics, naval robotics, downed an Mi-8, a hit helicopter the other day, and they're proving remarkably skillful to the extent that 1/3 of their ordnance of this kind is now produced by Ukraine. And Ukraine is a market leader, and it's going to be a very big presence and very difficult to deal with in this department. Now, why isn't Russia winning in the air? It's using crude weaponry. It's buying weaponry from wherever it can, getting some assistance from China, but obviously the cozying up to North Korea has had an effect, particularly for artillery ammunition, but there is collusion there on missiles, and we know that we suspect rather, they've been looking at hypersonics. It's whether Ukraine's air defenses can hold out through the winter and keep power going enough to the citizens and civilians. It's very interesting that we're seeing a similar phenomenon in the Middle East, particularly with regard to Gaza and to an extent the West Bank and Lebanon, and in Ukraine, Kursk and so on, is indiscriminate firepower being used against civilian populations. And this will be a long-term legacy, and things will not be allowed to rest there. And it will be Russia, and indeed, it must be said, Israel, will be in the firing line for the long arm of international law convention. They can't enforce much at the moment, but they will find ways, I suspect, within 5 years. So it's going to be decided in the air. Can Ukraine defend enough, and can it keep enough people in the front line? Why isn't Russia, for all these magic new weapons like the Oreshnik missile that was declared, it cannot get dominance so far? And it's even losing the thing which seemed to be a unique, crude weapon, but giving them great advantage, the glide bomb, which was old bombs with new guidance systems so that they could operate like a standoff cruise weapon. They're using them less frequently now. And I think this is where it will be decided. It will be decided to an extent with manpower, it will be decided by air power, and it will be decided by the economy.